welcome to Group 4 Statistics. So today we're gonna discuss some of your questions regarding risk assessment. So what are we waiting for? Let's start the discussion.
Okay, so before we proceed to the questions or answering the questions, let us first define what risk assessment is. So risk assessment is identifying hazards and risk factors that have the potential to cause harm. So for the first question,
Okay, so for the first question, why is it important to conduct a risk assessment prior to implementing mitigation controls?
okay, so we have defined what risk assessment is, and now let us define what mitigation is. So what is mitigation? It is the action of reducing the severity, the seriousness, or painfulness of something, or just basically reducing the harmfulness of something. So it is important to conduct risk assessment in order for us to know what are the specific hazards present in the area. So it also utilizes assessing security to distinguish, record, eliminate, or reduce hazards in a specific case situation. So if we know what are the hazards or the risks factors that are present in an area through conducting risk assessment, then we will be able to know what mitigation action and control to do in order to avoid danger. So for the second question,
For the second question, what outcomes would you expect when mitigation is based on a thorough risk assessment?
okay, so as I have said, risk assessment is identifying hazards. So if we have conducted a thorough risk assessment, then we would be able to know what appropriate and effective mitigations to do. So it also helps with risk avoidance and prevention. And basing the mitigation on a detailed risk assessment also lessens the severity of the harm that may be caused by the hazard. Of course, it is understandable that if we have conducted uh, um, what do we call this, a detailed risk assessment, then we would be able to know what specifically the hazards are present in that area, and then we would be able to identify or to plan out what mitigation control we should apply in that hazard. So next.
So question number 3, what would you expect if mitigation is implemented without conducting a risk assessment?
Okay, so as we have said earlier, risk assessment is identifying the hazards. So if the conducting a risk assessment is not implemented and then you've applied a mitigation, then it is possible that your workplace or your area would be in danger, because if a mitigation is implemented without conducting risk mitigation can result in large fines and opens up the possibility of accidents in the workplace, because it is important to understand what is the hazard present first before knowing what to apply. Of course, they need to match. I mean, if you have identified a certain hazard, then your mitigation should match the need in order to avoid that specific risk factors. Okay, so next.
Okay, for the last question, give at least 2 examples of tools which you can use to conduct a risk assessment.
Okay, so we have checklist analysis and the SWOT analysis. Now, what is the checklist analysis? So it is developed by listing items, steps, or tasks, and is then analyzed against criteria to determine if the procedure is completed correctly. So the checklist of risk categories is used to come up with additional risks for the project. So dito, you will list the items or steps or tasks you need to analyze, but in order to know what are the risks present in that area and what steps you should take or you should do in order to complete the procedure. And if we mean by the procedure is in order to avoid hazard or in order to avoid harm. Okay, so next is the SWOT analysis. So SWOT means strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So SWOT analysis is developed by listing and taking note of the SWOT. So of course, you should know the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the strengths, the threats in that specific area in order to know kung saan kayo nagkulang, kung what are the areas you need to focus on, or on what way that a threat like or a hazard may occur. So yun. So we have already discussed about the questions, and we already know what risk assessment or mitigation control is. I guess that's it for group 4, and thank you for listening, everyone. Bye.